Hey everyone, and welcome back to Don't Get Me Started with Disability Rights Mississippi. My name is Greta Martin. I'm the litigation director here at Disability Rights, and I am joined today by Jane Walton.
Back again.
Yes, and we have a really exciting topic today.
Yes, so once again I have come to you and said, Greta, there's something very important to me that I want to talk about, and I'm forcing myself on to talk about Free Britney.
Yes. As a child of the 90s, I'm very excited about talking on this topic because I, like most of us, have been following this crazy story about this long-term conservatorship that Britney Spears has been subject to. So, if you've been paying attention to the news, you've heard this phrase, hashtag Free Britney. You may have even used it on your Instagram account like I have.
For sure.
So, for those not familiar, the Free Britney movement is a social media turned real life activism campaign that was centered on pop star Britney Spears. Baby, one more time, Britney Spears. Talented pop star from the 90s. She's been under conservatorship since 2008.
Wild.
And basically that means she's been unable to make any decisions for herself regarding finances, medical care, daily activities. Even going for a drive or visiting with friends is subject to someone else's approval.
Right.
So after having a very personal mental health crises, very public, we all remember those horrific pictures. It occurred when she was a young mother under intense public scrutiny, just had her children blasted across tabloids. She was basically just stripped of her personhood.
Right. I grew up with Britney, and at many times in my life I literally wanted to be Britney Spears when I grew up.
Didn't we all?
So it's just now, especially looking back at that time in 2008, and just now, we're all kind of watching the documentaries and having a conversation and looking kind of back at what was done to her and how her, personal mental health crisis was turned into just tabloid fodder, and then that was kind of fuel for her to wind up in this situation. It's really, really sad, but I'm glad that we're talking about it now.
Yes, I think it's an important conversation because you have this the story that centers around this young woman's mental health, but also you have this story of this young mother who more likely than not was suffering some form of postpartum depression.
Right.
And you tack that on with the stress of being an international superstar. It's just it was an incredible story, and it's just sad to see that it has come this far for this long. So just a little bit about conservatorships and guardianships. So these are intended to assist those who are deemed to not be able to make decisions for themselves. They're typically reserved for those who are experiencing severe dementia or extreme mental illness, or those who might be unable to make the decisions which impact their health, safety, or their best interest. So Britney, mere months after being placed under her conservatorship, was back to work, performing for tens of thousands of people, operating under a grueling schedule, raking in millions of dollars, which is to say she has been completing activities that don't match up with the notion that she's so incapacitated that she cannot make simple decisions. It just didn't add up. That's
right.
Not the purpose of these legal situations.
Right.
And this has been going on for 13 years. And now, somehow, enough people have stood up and said this is not right and something is clearly amiss, and this has been thrust into the national spotlight. And I think it should be. The misuse of these legal circumstances, it's important.
Yeah.
Because there are places for this, but I do believe that it can be used as an abuse of authority, abuse of power for those who have mental illness, but yet may still be able to make their own decisions.
Right.
So I'm glad we're talking about this today.
Yeah. And like you said, and I know we're going to get into this more, not all conservatorships or guardianships are bad. They can be very helpful for people and help them, improve their quality of life. But, with the Britney situation, just the fact that she is, so stripped of her rights, but then is also, continuing on to work like she has, it's just, like we said, just something's not adding up. So obviously this is a big pop culture news story. You know, we love Britney, and it's all over Instagram. But I guess, why are we talking about this on this podcast? Why is this a disability rights issue?
Okay, so aside from Britney's story, this has just opened a new conversation that kind of shines a light on conservatorships and guardianships and how these systems are just a breeding ground for rights violations. But if you look through the lens of Britney's story, we're seeing how these systems can silence or isolate the people that are living under them. The overlap of people with disabilities and people who are under a guardianship or conservatorship is substantial. So today, we're going to dive in this topic as it relates to people with disabilities, particularly those in Mississippi. And I think it's important because we recently have had a revamp of our conservatorship and guardianship laws.
Right.
And so those were very antiquated, and disability rights sat on the committee that reviewed those laws and revamped those laws. So just a few things off the bat. Conservatorships and guardianships are often referred to interchangeably, but that is not accurate. They're similar but very distinct. A guardianship is more overarching, as a guardian has the ability to make more of a wide range of personal and medical decisions, whereas a conservator typically only has the authority to handle financial matters. So in Brittany's case, she's been under a conservatorship of both her estate, which is her finances and her assets, as well as her person, which means medical decisions, and that's where we got the whole kind of where her friends are able to visit and she's able to visit her friends, just her daily activities.
Right.
So it really depends on a state's terminology, the circumstance, and so on. But generally what we are talking about here are restrictions on the person's ability to make decisions for themselves. According to the National Council on Disability in 2018, an estimated 1.3 million people with disabilities were under guardianship. So
wow,
it's a big deal in the disability rights community for sure.
Right. And I know with Brittany, it's the word that's used is conservatorship.
Right.
But, she's in California, we're in Mississippi, like different states might have different laws, but, essentially she is under both a conservatorship and a guardianship because of it's personal and financial.
Yeah. And it's very different state by state. Like
Yeah.
I said, Mississippi until recently had very antiquated guardianship and conservatorship laws. Now I think they're a little more clearly defined, in my opinion. But, people do still use that interchangeably. Even when they call us, they tend to just stick with guardianship. They don't really know the aspects or that a conservatorship is different and it exists. So, just knowing that they're two separate pathways, it's helpful.
Gotcha. So I guess let's start from the beginning. Like, what is the process like of a guardianship or a conservatorship? How does it happen that someone would be placed under this situation? How does someone get assigned to be a guardian, etc.?
Okay, so a guardianship or conservatorship is appointed by the court. They're put into place after either the individual with the disability or someone else files a petition with the court. And in Mississippi, when we're looking at conservatorships, it says that they're put into place upon petition by the individual or one or more of his friends or relatives if a person is incapable of managing his own estate because of advanced age, physical incapacity, or mental weakness. If someone is placed under both a guardianship and a conservatorship, the same person frequently will serve as both the guardian and conservator. But several people could be appointed. It just varies, and it's on a case-by-case basis. So in Brittany's case, her father, infamously, is involved, as are the attorneys and financial managers.
Gotcha. So I think that's interesting. A person could themselves say, like, hey, I really could benefit from having someone help me manage, my financial affairs or help me manage some medical decisions, or it could be someone that is looking out for a family member, a friend.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that it truly can be adjudicated on a case-by-case basis. So it could be a limited conservatorship. If someone truly just needs help managing their finances, but they want to retain all the ability to make their own medical decisions, housing decisions, that can be done. It is the job of a chancellor to truly look to see what the individual needs and what's in their best interest. So an overarching guardianship or conservatorship may not be the case, may not be what they need.
Right.
And we want to encourage courts to limit conservatorships and guardianships so that individuals with disabilities or mental illness can participate in their own life, right? That was, to me, what was so heartbreaking about Brittany's story is that, she probably did need some kind of support at that time in her life.
Right.
It did not need to continue, and maybe it was only for certain parts of her life. So I just feel like in her case, it was overreaching and too long. And then just the heartbreak of what we know now is that she was still being forced to work.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't like we're going to put you in this situation and hope that you heal and get better.
Right.
It's we're going to put you out there and you're going to be a machine for this conservatorship. And so it was just, that's not the purpose.
Right. So what, I know we've kind of talked about, medical, financial, but let's get into the nitty-gritty a bit of what types of decisions guardians and conservators have the power to make in the person's life for whom they are serving.
Yeah, so this very public Brittany case is really brought to light how limited a person can be under these systems. The general definition of conservatorships and guardianships are pretty straightforward and make you think of major medical and financial decisions. This is just not always the case.
Right.
The power of these structures can really, seep into a person's daily life. Who gets to visit them at their home. I mean, it's kind of crazy. In her famous testimony recently, Brittany said that she was unable to see friends. She would have limited access to email or texts, making phone calls. She had no say over her medical treatment from, even the daily medicine that she took. And probably the most shocking was her ability to have say over her birth control and the removal of her IUD so that she could have more children. I mean, I can't even fathom. It was just crazy. But, she was forced to work, like I just mentioned, when she didn't want to. She was unable to even repaint her kitchen or go out for a drive.
That small detail of like, sad. You're a gajillionaire and you just literally want to repaint your kitchen cabinets, but someone is saying like, no, you cannot use your hard-earned millions of dollars to revamp your kitchen. Right.
But, in her situation's unique in that she is a high-functioning individual. She's capable of doing these things that she's been prohibited from doing. And, that's not the case for everybody. Many individuals under conservatorships or guardianships truly may be unable to drive or work or make these informed decisions regarding their medical care. But this just highlights how powerful these structures can be and how limited the rights of those who are under them are. A guardian can make decisions about where you live, who you live with, what you do each day, what goes into your body. A conservator can make decisions about how your money's spent and what you have access to materially. And through this public case, we can truly see how mismanaged or improperly administered these guardianships can be. And then, ultimately how they violate the civil rights of people with disabilities. And they can even be dangerous.
Right.
Of course, there are guardianships and conservatorships that are necessary and beneficial. And it's why it's so important to understand what these systems are, what they can do for people with disabilities, and why here at DRMS, we investigate these issues to protect the rights of people with disabilities.
Right. So you mentioned specifically, Mississippi had some really antiquated laws regarding this. So let's kind of get specific to Mississippi as we're here to serve Mississippians with disabilities. Can you kind of give me the landscape of what has happened in this conservatorship, guardianship world in the last few years?
Sure. So like I mentioned, Mississippi's laws regarding these systems were very stagnant for about 30 years. They, did not have any provisions with regards to oversight, monitoring, accountability, anything like that. It's obviously, those are huge parts of these systems to avoid abuse of individuals who are vulnerable. Also, you want that oversight to avoid things like fraud and financial exploitation.
Right.
But as I mentioned, in 2019, Mississippi Guardianship and Conservatorship Act, or the GAP Act, as I called it earlier, was signed into law. It was revised and updated, and it made substantial strides in providing some legal oversight to these systems. And I was very proud of the way Mississippi handled it, because they did create a committee of interested parties such as DRMS and others to construct these laws to be sensitive for the people that we protect.
Right.
So I was happy to see that is how they pursued the update.
Yeah.
But if you want to get to the crux of this major overhaul, there was a 2-year period of study by the Mississippi Commission on Guardianship and Conservatorship, which we participated in. They were truly charged by the Supreme Court to develop recommendations on how Mississippi and the courts could really do better in protecting vulnerable adults. This 2-year study on how to bring these laws into the modern era and what reporting requirements and accountability measures would be put into place was truly important. And fortunately, at the core of the charge of the commission was to protect the ward's fundamental rights. And that was major for Mississippi, honestly.
Yeah.
So in 2019, this comprehensive body of law, the GAP Act, was established. And so just some points that are provided in this new set of laws. So now there's clear distinguishing between the guardian of the person and the conservator of the estate. That's very important.
Right.
It clarifies the role of a guardian and conservator in the ward's life. There is specificity in the basis for the appointment of the guardian and conservator through improved medical evaluation. Another big issue.
Yeah.
The new sets of laws encourage individualized planning and the use of the least restrictive alternative. So that's something at DRMS we are always looking for with regards to people with disabilities.
Right.
It does a very good job of creating accountability between the guardian and conservator and the courts, and in order to prevent fraud and abuse. So just a heightened oversight responsibility for the court.
Right.
It strives to keep the ward informed of all procedural and substantive rights at hearings and ensures due process through the protection of the person and assets. Very important.
Right.
Probably one of the biggest things that was missing in the previous sets of laws was a written guardian conservator plan that would be used through the entire appointment. And so the court is able to adjust that as needed, but that was just something that wasn't always present in previous, prior to the GAP Act.
Right.
There's continual monitoring of each ward's plan, and you track both inventories and accounting through our electronic filing system in Mississippi. And there's just a better avenue for the reports to be specific and well written to keep the court informed. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it was great because those are some things that were not included in the antiquated laws we had before.
And it's wild to think just even a written plan wasn't required.
Yes.
I mean, all of this, you're like, yes, great. But to think about the fact that for 30 years this wasn't a part of the law is quite startling.
It is. But this new GAP Act defined a guardian very clearly as a person appointed by the court to make decisions with respect to the personal affairs of the ward, and clearly outlined a conservator to be a person appointed by a court to make decisions with respect to the property or financial affairs of a ward. So this all went into effect at the beginning of 2020, which seems like ages ago. Yeah. So it's still relatively new. The courts are still feeling their way through this, which is, to be expected when you completely overhaul a set of statutes. But it definitely provides a more robust framework for people with disabilities under these systems.
Wow. And yeah, like I said, it's just wild to think that this stuff wasn't in place. And also, I mean, I would say, now in terms of these laws and when you look at kind of how obviously vague it is maybe in California where Brittany is. Like Mississippi's kind of, I feel like, dare I say, at the forefront of, making sure people, wards are protected and their rights are protected, which is actually really cool to see that Mississippi has put forth these statutes to protect people.
The commission put in a lot of work. For Disability Rights Mississippi, our then legal director, Micah Dutro, was our representative, but he truly came back to the agency and got, an agency-wide feel on what we wanted to see in these new sets of laws. So he did a great job. But as I said, the commission was made up of a lot of stakeholders who have a lot of knowledge about this work.
Awesome. So. And I hope other states will follow a similar blueprint now that this is such a topic of conversation. So, kind of wrapping up, the news around this Free Britney movement is changing by the day. When we started researching this episode, things have already changed for Britney. And so, while as of today, Britney's conservatorship has not been terminated, she has been granted some relief through the court in terms of certain aspects. Her father's no longer her conservator, etc. So kind of as we continue to watch this changing news, why is this so central and important to the rights of people with disabilities?
So this Free Britney movement truly pushed this issue into the forefront. That this was just not something that people had a lot of knowledge about and the potential abuse before. And now you have a whole society of people who just cannot believe that this was allowed to continue. If you're an advocate or an attorney, you might know about them. I mean, honestly, that this was not my area of the law before coming to DRMS, so I knew very little about them. But it was this movement that really thrust these systems into conversation. It's important to remember that before Britney Spears and after all this fades away, there are people around the country who are in similar positions. They're just not pretty pop stars.
Right.
So they're not in the public eye. Conservatorships and guardianships impact just about every facet of life of the individual, from financial and medical decisions to the smallest daily choices that are, it's very vital for that person's freedom and choice and personality. There are some individuals who greatly benefit from these arrangements, who are much safer and have a better quality of life. And there are conservators and guardians who are capable and generous, and they understand their role, and that is important. But it is very true that this system creates a need for pause, for critique and examination. And by and large, it is people with disabilities who are impacted the most. There's this concept we talk about a lot in the disability community, which is, dignity of risk.
Right.
If you don't have a disability, you have every opportunity and every right at any point in your day to make a decision. And sometimes those decisions are not great.
Right.
We all make mistakes. We're all human. But there's dignity and autonomy in being able to make those mistakes and learn from them and move forward. And people with disabilities are often denied that opportunity. Of course, these arrangements create opportunities for abuse, neglect, exploitation, fraud. And that's something that here we have the authority to investigate, and we do. I think it's important for people who are under these types of systems, under a conservatorship or guardianship, that if they feel they have a rights violation, that they contact our office. We're here to help. We have the authority to help. But also, alternatively, if you have a conservator or a guardian who just wants some guidance and they just don't feel like they can go to the court, we're happy to walk them through, what their role should be and how to make their role effective, but also give some autonomy to the person that they are overseeing. Right. So, we have help here. So our website and social media have all of our contact information. So just look for that in our show notes. And thank you, Jane. I loved being able to talk about Free Britney. Yes. As, like I said, a 90s kid who listened to her albums. And I hope she is seeing some relief from this atrocious misuse of the legal system. So thanks everyone for listening in about our chat on Free Britney and conservatorships and guardianships. And I'm Greta Martin with Disability Rights Mississippi, and we are just getting started. The information provided during this episode does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. All content provided by Disability Rights Mississippi on this podcast is for informational purposes only.